Yo, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World. Ever so slightly delayed. Thank you everybody for tuning in and for commenting on LinkedIn and for hanging around. There's quite a few people waiting there for this to start. So I appreciate your patience. Technical difficulties, as always. This thing is never straightforward. But yes, welcome. We're going to have an epic conversation today with Cobus Greyling, ex-product manager, product owner, I believe, actually, of Vodafone at Vodacom in South Africa. And it's going to be unbelievable. For those of you that don't know Cobus, he writes constantly in the space of conversational AI. He's extremely experienced and knowledgeable of implementing all of this kind of stuff. He probably knows more about every platform that's available than anybody else that I know. I think I've read every single one of his articles, and so there's a few comments in here. Sangeetha, for example, Cobus writings are awesome. I am absolutely with you, and I'm going to be fanboying out a little bit, I think, during this session. But before we get to that, I want to give a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Deepgram. Deepgram are industry-leading speech recognition providers. Really quick response times, incredibly accurate service. And when you are creating speech recognition systems or voice assistants in general, you really do need to have high degrees of accuracy, because if not, any errors in your speech recognition get fed into your NLU, and trying to hack your way through that means that your NLU ends up in an absolute mess. So do invest in proper speech recognition, and Deepgram has got you covered when it comes to that. We'll be running a webinar with Deepgram all about really why big tech doesn't innovate as quickly or as often as you might think, especially when it comes to speech recognition. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that, which we'll get into in the webinar that we do with Deepgram. And we'll be covering how to audit your speech recognition as it currently stands, and how to implement a flexible AI architecture to mean that you can customize and move quickly for every new use case and every new situation. So it doesn't matter whether you're looking for something for your call center to transcribe calls, whether you're looking for something for your business to transcribe meetings, whether you're looking for something for your product to enable dictation or to caption videos, or whether you're using it for voice assistant services. This webinar will be absolutely vital for you. So I will put the link in here in just a moment's time when we kick off, and it'll be in the show notes as well. And so, okay, without further ado, let's do it. Let's welcome Cobus. Cobus, welcome to VUX World.
Okay, it feels a bit surreal speaking to
you. Well, you've been in shackles for so long. This has been something I've been wanting to do for about 3 years. So it's the shackles are off now. You're out in the wild.
Yeah, like Tobi voicebot out in the wild, and it can be a harsh place.
Nice. Well, it's nice. I mean, you can definitely. I mean, even while you're at Vodacom, you were writing prolifically, and always do write prolifically in this kind of space. And I'm definitely curious and interested to, get into this conversation. One, to get your thoughts on the current state of play as far as technology is concerned, and two, some of the real practical lessons that you've learned that you might be able to share with the audience here around how to go about properly implementing this stuff. But before we do that, and ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, as you are tuning in, if you've got any questions for Cobus, which I imagine you probably do, please do stick it in the chat, and we will do our very best to get to it. And while before we get into that, though, it'd be interesting. I'd love to know where your kind of interest in this stuff came from. I mean, in order to write as often as you do, you don't just write, you really climb inside all of the various systems and platforms and all that kind of stuff. So you really develop a good understanding of everything that you write about. The writing is almost like the output. So you must really have a passion for it. So where did that come from?
Kane, I started off in land surveying and geographic information systems, and that's I'm being dated by that now. But there's a time in the middle 90s when GIS was something new, and I remember distinctly there was this event, and they said all data will be underpinned by location. Pictures, documents, all data will be underpinned by location. And when I heard that, I thought, well, how is that even possible? How would you even capture, how would you assign a location to every piece of information, being it a picture or a business, or whatever the case might be? And then that happened, and today it's commonplace. It's not something strange. And in that time, I was listening to a talk, and the speaker spoke about one of the ultimate devices for the future. And so he listed a few ultimate devices, and one of that was speech, speech access and speech interfaces. So, you know, um, making a career change is like setting your hair on fire and putting it out with a hammer. You know, you're not sure what's worse. So I did it. I made two career changes. Twice I made a career change, and so back then it was primarily IVR. So we literally did IVR from Cape Town to Cairo,
Mm.
um, at the whole of Africa, Nigeria, DRC. I can write a book about those experiences. But then it was mainly IVR, and we used voice XML, and I was working for an IBM business partner. We focused on the IBM suite, WebSphere voice response, voice server, for the people that still remember that. But then it was primarily, menu-driven, voice-driven menus,
Mm.
right? So for balance, say one; for account, say two; or for balance, say balance; for account, say account. And then, as things unfolded, I really got this interest in conversational AI, and I really wanted to understand. So while I tried to make sense of the market, I really saw there were products, there were product documentation, lots of tutorials, and lots of marketing hype. White papers, being masked as, or marketing material being masked as white papers. And so I really saw there's a need, and I wanted that, for people to prototype and then write on what they experienced,
Mm.
not to copy and paste. And many of the publications basically just copy and paste from help documents, and to put an article together. And I think that's where it started. And then just seeing, what do people say? Does it resonate? Am I wrong? Am I, losing my mind? And then I think it's like this, you start feeding off it, and you want to publish the next thing and the next thing. And then it just became a habit, and I think a deep curiosity to know and to understand, the commercial landscape and the different products. So that's basically like where I came from.
Mm.
And then, you see different things. You have to, like, look at a product and prototype and build something. But then as time went on, I had these different products, and I could start comparing it. And that really gets lots of traction. You compare different frameworks, and you make good friends, and you make some good enemies as well. And it's something I really find interesting. So I saw one of your headliners now the last few days was about big tech,
Mm.
and big tech getting it wrong.
Mm.
What was the exact phrase you used?
The irony of big tech.
The
How
irony of, yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And I find it so interesting because looking at the current Gartner conversational AI document report and their quadrants, it's really a case of the behemoths, the giants being upset, and all these smaller companies like just forging their way into that, being the visionaries and having the ability to execute. And so when I read that headline from you, it really resonated with me, because you currently see that.
Mm.
Some of these companies, and I'm actually now busy writing an article on Amazon Lex version 2.
Mm.
If you think where AWS should have been, um, or some of the other products, even if I look at Nuance Mix, Nuance, that was always a leader in speech to text and text to speech, and voice enablement.
Mm.
But if you look at their conversational AI platform and a few others as well, you really think they should have been further along. you
Mm.
know. And so for me, these smaller companies, I mean, they're throwing everything at the customer. When you got free access,
Yeah.
you got free access to the whole system. I think, I don't know if I can name
Yeah,
What
I
I
think we
can,
can.
but Cognigy and Core AI, they
Mm.
recently just you get free access. You can just go for it.
Yeah,
And then you still have Oracle, IBM Watson. I think to some extent Google as well. Where you have to enter a credit card,
yeah,
to get going. Azure. I mean, I've I once ran up this bill on Azure, something. I just didn't see the services.
yeah,
So they're making this available freely, their platforms, and it's almost like they don't have any technical debt. They can look
yeah.
at it with a fresh pair of eyes and really innovate. And so I think there's quite a bit of catch up, and that to that point, right? So I mean, you introed with Deepgram, and Deepgram is something I would love to get into, but if also, and I think of the same ilk as Deepgram, but if you think of Resemble and
Mm.
Respeecher, I just
Yeah.
recently listened to a podcast on Respeecher, and the innovation in terms of speech recognition, but especially in speech synthesis,
Mm.
creating voices. I mean, some of the things that's being done, it's just out of this world. So I actually lost touch with that
Mm.
in terms of the voice components, and it feels like gone is the day that you rely on an end-to-end solution. I think perhaps Nuance Mix still has got that edge, where when you deploy application on Nuance Mix platform, then they pair the ASR with the NLU, which I
Mm.
think is really neat, and I think that's a that's a distinct advantage they've got
Mm.
of pairing the NLU and the, and the ASR. It's kind of cohesive, so that layer of translation most probably works better there. But
Mm.
I think, when it comes to audio and generating audio and synthesis, not even speech, but background music or effects to the speech, I think these companies are really running away with it.
Mm.
Uh, and so I think there's going to be a polarization of sorts, definitely,
Yeah.
in terms of how people choose the different components just to have the best combined solution.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because like you mentioned Google and Lex and stuff like that there, it seems like they kind of were a bunch of siloed capabilities. NLU, like Google Dialogflow ES, pretty much just NLU. To make anything happen, there's no dialogue management that comes with it. You have to build it all yourself, code it all yourself. You want to put it into a voice channel, you got to put some speech recognition on the front of it. So you've got these kind of like component parts and TTS on top of that. All these component parts that you can kind of stitch together. But then you've got platforms, as you mentioned, Cognigy, Core AI, and others, where they're bringing it as not fully end to end because they're relying on speech recognition from somewhere else and synthetic speech from somewhere else and stuff like that. But it's still a one place. You just go to one place. You can design, you can deploy, and all of those other components become part of it. Whereas I think Google kind of maybe was a bit late to developing CX because by the time CX was released, all of these other platforms already had so many features
Mm.
that CX was almost like it was a bit of a mind boggle because everyone was used to the kind of no code, low code builders and stuff. Um, but then at the same time, you've got that kind of, I think, modularization, for want of a better word, can give you a bit of flexibility, can't it? Because you could bring in Deepgram for speech recognition and
Yeah,
tailor that
um,
model. You could have one NLU potentially, or a bunch of different NLUs for different use cases. You might have a customized synthetic voice, which you won't get from a built out the box kind of platform. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on how you're thinking about this kind of modularization versus full kind of platform, and whether there's the benefits and drawbacks of each kind of approach.
I just had this flood of thoughts while you were speaking. Yeah, I think that there are two problems to people. I think there are two problems to organizations delivering an exceptional voice experience. And there's one thing especially I want to touch on, but I'll get to that just now. But I think the two problems for any organization to deliver exceptional speech experience, the one is cross-selling. So there might be an organization. So I think the one thing is that many companies cannot have ASR or speech synthesis. It's too specialized. The amount of data you need, it's just I mean, it's a lot of data you need. It's highly specialized. So I think these companies will continue running away with voice, with speech synthesis and ASR definitely. But I think that the two dangers, for a good voice experience, the one is cross-selling. So an organization might have, already an NLU implementation, or that they might have some kind of analytics or business solution, and then they present an inferior ASR solution or inferior speech synthesis solution, and then they cross-sell. We give you 60% discount, 40% discount for the first year. So I think that's a real, and that's where, and I've got no axe to grind. So I mean, I think that's where the IBMs and the Googles and the Microsoft, that's where they got that leverage. They're already in there with their cloud solution. I think related to that, and the second thing is I call them the cloud you're in. Use the cloud you're in. So someone is using Oracle Cloud, or they're using AWS extensively already, and then they say, well, let us just make use of this cloud we're already in. So Amazon Lex version 2 or Oracle, bot, Oracle Assistant. It's probably not as good, but that's the cloud we in. We can get it for free or huge discounts. So we just make that. So I think that cross-selling, that will always be there, and use the cloud you're in. The cloud that's the easiest, or the cloud So the developers might be developing in Google Cloud, and then they opt just to extend the application. So I think that bias, will always be there. But I think what excites me about, like you mentioned, Deepgram or Core AI or Cognigy or OneReach. I haven't really played with the OneReach. I mean, if you want me to, just give me access. I was with Oracle today, and they wanted to charge me 80 euros in rands. That's a lot of
Really?
money. I just put that. But I think that the thing with those companies are that they're raising the table stakes immensely. So they really, and re-speecher, like the table stakes are really up there. So for anyone to, just if you look at the Gartner report, if you just take Cognigy or Core AI or OneReach, that's a complete end-to-end conversational AI solution, and which you can then voice enable. So you put the ASR or speech synthesis on top of that. If you look what the current table stakes are for any company to reach parity with them, I mean, imagine the cost and the effort to just reach parity, and then you don't have differentiation, and you don't have market share. So you're just on parity, and then you just got to keep up, adding table stakes, and then getting market share and some kind of differentiation. So I think that's going to become harder and harder in general. So I don't know, I think like someone like Nuance Mix can catch up. I think IBM Watson Assistant can catch up. Perhaps AWS or Google, if they throw more money at it, they can still catch up. Maybe they don't see a need to catch up, but it's going to be very hard because that table stakes are so high. And I don't think any company, any conversational AI platform, end-to-end platform, can go for the speech solution, the speech components, let's call it that, the ASR and synthesis, because those guys are just too far ahead. So what I think is going to happen, and I see someone's got their human first in Qbox, and I think you can add Botium as well.
Yeah.
But I think what's going to happen.
Podcast tomorrow, Botium, by the way, you can check that
Sorry?
out. They're on the podcast tomorrow, Botium. Christoph from Botium's on the podcast.
So not just to have an equal representation. So I think what's going to happen, and Deloitte actually did a very nice report on this. So they said there are. Well, I changed a bit, so my interpretation of what they said, or my version, but originally I got it from them. The verticals are going to emerge. So as the voice, so you're going to see like a the speech components. There's going to be leaders. The conversational AI, there are leaders, and then you're going to see these verticals starting to emerge.
Mm.
You know, there are 7 vertical vectors. I think they said 6. I thought there might be 7. You know, in terms of bot testing, automation, you know, improving your ASR. So there's going to be these niche products, you know,
Yeah.
filling the gaps between these between the verticals in terms of testing, you know, having better dialogue management, and the like.
Mm.
So, and I think that there's going to be the next gold rush is going to be there, because you know the table stakes are still low, and there's lots of functionality that the current frameworks do not have to a
Mm.
large degree. I mean, like the one thing is just um, ingesting recordings or text and having intents, so having clusters of intents, and being able to set the granularity of those clusters
Mm.
and the size of those clusters, and just getting an idea of what your intents are. You know, a
Mm.
tool like that, you know, currently you know, 2 or 3 frameworks have it, but not
Yeah.
really, you know, something that's scalable and functional. I don't know if
Mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Those kind of like siloed components. I suppose I mean, what you call it, have like AWS have got that intent miner. I think Genesis actually call it the intent miner. AWS call it chatbot builder, automated chatbot builder, or something like that. I know a couple of other platforms have got something similar. Um, but yeah, you're right. It doesn't. It basically just does the first step, which is just kind of like wrapping it all up and batching them into buckets rather than there's no next level. How do you filter that? How do you clean it up? How do you kind of monitor it and all that sort of stuff? But it's interesting where you mentioned in there the parity between the platforms. Cognigy and Core AI and a lot of the ones listed on that on the Gartner Magic Quadrant have kind of really they've got kind of everything that you would need really. But then you've got companies like I don't know, like Poly AI, for example, Action AI in the UK, where really they don't have a front facing customer accessible thing. It's more a service that they use their own proprietary technology to deliver almost like a fully managed service. I don't know if you've kind of looked at any of that stuff and what your thoughts are on those kind of fully managed service companies versus the platforms.
Um, sure. To be honest, I'm not with Poly AI and Action AI. I'm not too familiar with them.
Mm,
Um, I would, for me, in my small mind, I saw basically, 5 categories of conversational AI. For me, the first category is like, the hardcore, the Rasa, Deep Pavlov, those kind of environments.
mm,
That's really it's open source. And I did this thing. I wrote this shout out on LinkedIn for Rasa because Rasa is a bit of my company crush. And so many of, if you dig a bit deeper, so many of the underlying technology is in many solutions is Rasa.
mm,
And so maybe enterprise readiness, is it there or not there? That's open for discussion. But I think what they've done for the community and for developers and advocacy is immense, and the amount of data they share, information they share. So
mm,
that's for me like category one. Maybe you can add mind meld there as well.
mm.
I mean, it's Cisco mind meld. Cisco bought mind meld,
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
and they just open sourced it, which I thought was a huge gift to the community. And there's all of a sudden there's been quite a bit of traction on mind meld.
Mm.
So that's
They're doing
the
some pretty good stuff with Cisco MindMeld and the call center, Cisco call center. They're working on some pretty good stuff there.
Yes, yes. So that's for me is category one, open source, bit hardcore. Then there's category two, the big tech laggards. Yeah, the irony, that's the Googles, the IBMs that's been upset, that's been pipped at the post, like cloud solutions.
Mm.
That's really got a bigger collection of cloud solutions.
Would
Category
you would you put
three,
Reaver? Sorry, would you put Reaver in NVIDIA Reaver in category 2?
well, that's actually a good question because I was looking at I added this fifth category. and yeah, well, fifth category, and yeah, so Riva, I don't know what to do with NVIDIA Riva.
It's pretty
Um,
hardcore though, isn't it? There's a lot of customization, and you need to know your stuff to be able to use it properly.
yeah, I think let's put Riva in category 1. I liked Riva, not only because they sent me all the swag NVIDIA, but I like the idea of Riva. I like the fact that they've got 2 demo applications that can either work with Dialogflow or Rasa machine learning stories, so that they're really flexible. I think the one thing that Riva still misses is a dialogue management system. You know, and so they've got like a studio. I think it's called NVIDIA Riva Studio. That's been in early release. Like once every 2 weeks, I go apply for access, just to get early access. But I really like the demo of Riva with Rasa. And I think maybe. Yeah, that was for me a very good demo. The demo with Google was also good. I think Riva you can put perhaps in the first, also in category 1, definitely. And the fact that they lack a dialogue management or dialogue state engine, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they've shown that they can use, really the two opposites very successfully. And that's actually a very satisfying demo to build. If you go to NVIDIA, you just need to create an EC2 instance with a GPU. It's got to be Turing or one of the other GPUs, a later GPU, and you can just run it for a day. Just make sure you shut it down, otherwise you'll be bankrupt. And then the category 2 is like the normal big cloud
Yeah.
solutions. I would say category 3 is the new kids, like the people that the end-to-end solution, and yeah, the complete end-to-end solutions like the core iOS one reach those solutions that's really contained its software as a service, and you can start off small and have those iterations, and then category 4, I would say, are like almost the 7 vertical vectors, like Qbox, Botium, Human First. I put what's the Spacey? Not they've got an annotation tool, Explosion. I forgot the name now. This
I don't
yeah,
know.
so they've got
A text store, is it? No, they're data training.
yeah. So anyway, so there's quite a bit of. I mean, and I know from Vodafone, Qbox had a huge impact on our non-intent. I mean, like non-intent, and that's a story we can get to. But our non-intent for Tobi voicebot went from 51% to 11%.
Wow.
It was just it's stellar. So those tools really helps a lot.
Yeah. Shout out to
That's
Qbox. We've got Benoit commenting, actually, CEO of Qbox, marketing hype never. That was from earlier on. I didn't bring it up, but shout out to Benoit.
yeah, it's not yeah no it's there's lots of hype, mumbo jumbo, but yeah, no, and so that category for me is that category of improvement tools, annotation tools, tools where you want to just improve your training data and things like that. And then I think the fifth category is that's the large language models, and
Yeah.
so I've of late been playing with Cohere, obviously OpenAI's language API, and it's Hugging Face, and yeah, I mean it's really overwhelming, and I'm not always too sure how would one implement those large language models, like Cohere, OpenAI. There's another one I haven't looked at. I think it's AI
Yeah,
21 Lab,
21 in it. Yeah.
21 AI Lab. So
Yeah.
that's one I would like to get into. But if I look at cost and how you can leverage, to what extent, I don't know if you can really harness or leverage the power of those solutions. I mean, it's staggering the way OpenAI can the natural language generation. I was also surprised by Cohere how you can train your own NLG model. So, but how to harness it and practically implement it, that's um, it's, I think that's a bit of a challenge. So those are I would say the 5 categories, and maybe one doesn't yet know to what extent large language models will be used. I mean, definitely companies like Google and um, uh, Apple, I mean, they use large language models, but if you think about an enterprise, big brick and mortar customer service environment, I don't know how exactly one would, and maybe those use cases will be introduced somewhere, some way down the road.
Mm.
Um, and that's why when I was listening these days, sorry, can I just go
Yeah,
on
yeah,
to
yeah. Go on. I'll give a before you do. I'll give a quick shout out to Lauren from Raza as well. We've mentioned Raza a few times. She said, "Back at you, Cobus. Democratizing conversational AI is part of our mission."
I always feel inferior when I read said Rachel Tatum and those people from Rasa. They're a highly intelligent bunch, Alan Nickel and Lauren as well. But so many things I don't fully understand, but I like the open NLU pipeline. We did a few POCs, and because Afrikaans is the only other language I speak, we did a POC in Afrikaans
Mm,
with some of the embeddings, and we had, like, I think the thing about so the fact you've got an open pipeline like with Rasa, and you can define your which what elements you want in that NLP or NLU pipeline, and the amazing results you can have with limited training data. So and that for me, like, that's really amazing about something like Rasa. You don't need
mm,
loads and loads of training data. And then the same goes for most of the NLU engines. Like, you really just need 10 to 15 to 20 um, examples per intent to
mm,
have to have a workable prototype or proof of concept. So I mean, like, for instance, I was looking these days at tools where you can introduce utterances and just have those utterances clustered,
mm,
just to see, like, what are people saying in my organization. So what was nice with Cohere is that you can import like a small number of just sentences, and it does this vector embedding. So visually, it clusters the different word groups, and you can just click and see what are people saying. So visually, you see those intents,
mm,
things of intents. And then also, there's also another. It's almost like I'm stuck these days with the Canadian companies, but Human First also have a solution where, with a few utterances, a few hundred utterances, you can have this clustering of intents. And then I go to I look at, then I see, well, Lex, Amazon Lex
mm.
version 2 has got the same, and I say, oh, I want to use it, but I need 10,000 utterances, and it's got to be in a certain Tyson format. And I say, well, I'm not going to spend like days, and I'm not going to spend days. 10,000 utterances is crazy. Like, with
Yeah,
code, you can have 5 utterances or 10. I think with Human First, I don't know, also like a few dozen, and you get your
yeah.
information. Um, so that being able to prototype with very little training data, you know, um, that's immense. That
Mm.
really helps a lot. But I just wanted to mention something. It's always in the back of my mind. But when I listen to the CEO of Core AI, I think it's is it
Raj Kaneru.
Raj Kanera. He said something that really resonated with me. Because we everyone's thinking of in terms of Alexa and Google Home, and then he said in this interview, he said selling any conversational AI, any chatbot to an organization is hard, because you're going to the customer service chief or executive, and you're saying to him, I want to introduce another digital channel,
Mm,
you know, and then they just say, well, I'm drinking from a fire hose.
mm,
I don't want more trouble. And then he said that they've got this focus, their customers want them to introduce a voice bot, but over a normal GSM call. So you actually place a call and you speak to the voice bot over a phone call.
Mhm.
And that I loved listening to that, because that's what, Tobi voicebot was
Mm.
and still is. It's a boy. So you've got to, so the business driver was, our biggest cost is incoming calls.
Yeah.
It's agents sitting servicing those calls. We've got agent assist or robotic process automation, or whatever you want to call it, but we want to automate telephone calls that comes in, and that's one of the biggest drivers. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And so the big challenge is then, how do you automate normal customer care calls that comes into the call center, and you introduce a conversational agent, a voice bot, to take those calls. And I think that is really, really hard. But I
Mm.
think that's where the real growth of speech interfaces lies, in terms of, to what extent can you have a digital agent that's fielding those calls, and it's a voice bot,
Mm.
that people phone into, by just a telephone call.
Yeah.
That's the challenge, but that's where the current need and desire lies.
Yeah, definitely. There was definitely seeing a big trend towards that. Like, I think over the last 2 years since COVID, really, and we were talking about it quite a lot beforehand and did a bit of work on it beforehand. But definitely since COVID, it seems to be really kind of taken off. And in fact, on the podcast, we had a webinar with Core AI recently, and Raj was talking about their agent assist approach. And one of the ways that they approach agent assist is actually creating those self-service bots in the first instance. And for whatever reason, when people end up getting through to a live agent, it's the bot that's still handling the request and processing the
Mm,
transaction, and then it just kind of relays stuff back to the agent. Um, there's also a really good approach from we've had HomeServe on the podcast recently. Marks and Spencer's have been on the podcast recently, and a couple of others, all talking about their kind of IVR automation journey. And it's still, some of the results they're getting is pretty good. HomeServe, I think they are something like 20% of their calls is being routed through their voice bot, and it's having somewhere in the region of an 85% success rate.
mm,
So it's going really well. I think that's definitely where it's headed. And I think the two opportunities that you have with the voice channel that you don't with chat is that, one, certainly on the text to speech side, you've got an opportunity for brand differentiation, for creating a bespoke,
mm,
customized brand voice. But also, you can actually create some really good experiences, because most times when people call a call center, they expect it to be a terrible experience anyway. Gonna wait on hold, gonna just sit here,
Low
you know.
expectation.
Yeah, it's just like we know it's gonna be a nightmare, so I'm gonna have to get it done. But so you've got an opportunity to turn what is usually a dreaded and dreadful interaction into something that's decent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think maybe it's true what you say. People, they've got low expectations, but if I could just mention something on that, Kane, like, so something we found, and there's, if you facing the customer, like, if you release that bot, then you committed.
Mm.
There's no theory, there's no unicorns and clouds. It's really down to, so what we did is we had 4 metrics, and I don't know if I can quickly look at that, Kane.
Mm.
So we used 4 metrics. So the first metric we introduced was containment, right?
Mhm.
And so that was very easy. You just keep the customer away from the agent.
Yeah.
So you just don't allow them to transfer, and containment is sky high, and everyone is happy. And um, you
Meanwhile,
know,
customers are still absolutely fuming.
yes. And then I think the second thing, so containment, seemed it was good, um, but it was a poor experience. So the second element we introduced was establishing if the caller returns if the caller makes contact with the organization within 7 to 10 days, right? So on any other channel.
Mm-hmm.
So what percentage of customers does not contact us again within, say, 10 days? Because what happened was people found the voice bot, it's a terrible experience, and then they go via the app or they go to the walking center
Yeah.
or or they schedule a call back through the web, whatever the case might be. So then all of a sudden we saw, well, that figure is low, right? So we've got to bring that figure up. It's got to be somewhere in the 80s where we resolve. We built so much context that we make sure that the user does not come back again within 10 days. The third metric we added was Net Promoter Score. Now, Net Promoter Score is brutal. I think promoters is just 8, 9, and 10, right? Or 9 and 10. I'm not too sure, but
Yeah.
the 8. So it's brutal. If you send out a text message and you ask people to rate the service from 1 to 10, and that's a different story. But Net Promoter Score was down the floor, through the floor. It was really poor. And then the fourth metric we introduced was customer satisfaction. So Net Promoter Score is often across the whole organization,
Mm.
and we found we found our detractors and say, why did you rate us low? And the one guy said, I actually had a fight with my wife this morning and I just needed to vent. And when I got your, I got your rating, I just went for it. We said, well, fair enough. It's at least the guy's honest. But then also so that's across the organization, Net Promoter Score. But then customer satisfaction we measured within the journey segments, and those four metrics you've got to push them. So if you improve the TNPS, then maybe containment drops. So if you improve containment, then let's call it your Tobi 7 or your Tobi 10, that drops again. So it's almost like a doctor giving medicine for blood pressure, but then anxiety goes up, and he gives something for anxiety, but then something else happens. And you've got to bring up those four metrics slowly and try and get them as high as possible. And something we found was that we used to focus on journey completion, successful journey completion,
Mm.
and it didn't work, because the moment someone get their PUK or number, or once they reset their PIN, they hang up.
Mm.
They abandon the call. So it seems like an abandoned call. And perhaps an abandoned call can be when someone waits for an agent, but people hang up because they've got what they need.
Mm.
Um, so I think those were the four metrics we pursued. And I think it was really successful in looking at those four and trying to push it up as high as possible. And then also I think from a practicality, I think we also had an hour a day transcript reviews.
Mm.
So the whole voice squad sits for 1 hour a day. The product owner makes sure everyone is there, from the dev to the designer to the copywriter, and we look at the transcripts. Just go and if you go through transcripts for an hour a day in a month, you establish a collective understanding. Often people describe something as scope creep, but it's really just your understanding growing.
Mm.
And if there's a collective understanding, and that collective understanding is growing within the squad, that really helps a lot. So it's really sitting down and going through the transcripts and just getting a sense of what the customer is experiencing. And if I can mention maybe just a last thing on that, and that also came out in that the core AI thing was, you've got to when it comes to call centers, lots of money is involved. There are service levels and lots of pressure in terms of delivering and all those kind of things. But one area you need to be bold in is making the voice bot open and more verbose.
Mm.
So, it's really hard. So initially you're conservative and you say, well, say upgrade or say update my account. Because let's just give them words. But then upgrade account or update account, it's so close. So there's lots of ambiguity that's being introduced. So I think that one thing that really worked well for us is getting the customer to say what their query is. So to get him to speak maybe 7 to 10 seconds and telling them, please, in a few short words, explain to me what your problem is. And we really saw a huge improvement in, in detecting intent when we got users to speak. And I just saw a comment about the intent deprecation. I want to say something about that just now, but I think what really also helped us was then to establish themes. So it's very hard to pinpoint a conversation to an intent, right? But if you have a theme, and I saw some of the platforms introduce that where you have a theme and then you can use that theme to disambiguate. And that's what I like about Cohere as well. How you can use NLG to create disambiguation menus, their NLG. So, for instance, some would say, I was just mugged, I was just
Mm.
robbed. And that's unfortunately a big problem in South Africa, the theft of phones.
Mm.
And then you can say, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. I hope you're okay. And I can help you with blacklisting your device or doing a SIM swap or locking your line.
Mm.
Or you say, I see your line is locked. It seems like things have stabilized. Would you like to unlock your line? So then you establish a theme that I couldn't make the payment, or my phone was stolen, or I lost my phone. And then you have a disambiguation menu to service that theme, and you give and that's like an easy way to establish intent disambiguation menus,
Mm.
because
Mm.
you're making it the user's problem to choose
Yeah.
what actually you're saying here are 3 intents or 4 intents. Choose the one that suits you. So
Mm.
I think that really stood us in very good stead, because you've got to be bold in opening the speech interface over the phone. And then you also got to be conservative in assigning the user too quick to an intent.
Mm.
And because then that goes into, um, um, you can just take someone on a long journey. And something we found, like, I mean, there's disambiguation that's easy for us but hard for machines. Like, for instance, there's a drop of water on my phone, or I dropped my phone in the water.
Mm.
For us, that's easy to disambiguate, right? But for a machine, it's harder to
Mm.
disambiguate. But then there's instances where there's true ambiguity. Like, I saw Kane with binoculars. I mean, does that mean I saw you with binoculars around your neck, or did I see you while I was looking through binoculars? So we just realized we've got those two problems. The machine cannot disambiguate as good as humans can, and there are true ambiguity where you just don't know.
Mm.
And the best is to kick that back to the user and let them establish. And something also, we also looked at a reception desk. So, because obviously the voice bot is a narrow domain, it
Mm.
services a telco, a mobile operator. So, we looked at someone sitting at a front desk, and someone walks in, and they walk into a bank's front desk and say, I want to buy airtime. I want to buy an iPhone. Well,
Mm.
sorry, you're in the wrong building. We can't help you. I think, and that's definitely, so there are people phoning in, we can't service them,
Yeah.
but then also, if the person is in the right building, then the receptionist, is trying to establish intent, that they're having a conversation try and establish intent and then use that person that walked into the building. And we try to emulate that, to try up front to establish what is the intent of the user. And once we're sure, so that's something I liked about Cognigy. They've got a threshold per intent
Yeah.
where you can have a follow-up intent or a confirmation on that confirmation in question on that intent.
Yeah.
So you can like have a double take on that, to make sure you sending the person off, or you're signing the right intent to that conversation. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Let me go into some of these questions. So we've got some questions coming through here. We'll start with Michael McTair, who is saying, I'll see if I can get it all on here. Probably can't get it all on there. So we'll say, how do you see the relationship between conversational AI systems and tools used in commercial systems that involve traditional design and handcrafting the systems being developed by the large tech companies such as Google, Facebook, etc., involving massive language models and deep learning technologies such as transformers? I think we might have covered some of that. Did we cover some of that discussion there? The relationship between the kind of like platform tools like Cognigy, etc., plus the handcrafted modular kind of approach of using cloud providers and stuff like that. I feel like we might have covered that earlier on.
Yeah, if I can mention one thing on that kind, and that's, I think the one thing I would like to add to what we said is just the ability to scale. That I've seen in practice where I think there's this famous quote, first we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us.
Yeah.
And I often think of that because you become a slave of the machine you brought in, because you've got to live with the impediments and the shortcomings of that framework. So you've really got to look at something that scales well. And I think the one element that plays a big role is fine-tuning. And if I can just mention this, so obviously, love is something very complex, right? But a red heart is an abstraction of love, right? So it's really a simplified representation of something that's very complex, between living beings. So what you're trying to do with a conversational agent, you're taking something that's very complex like conversation, and you create an abstraction of that conversation, and then from that abstraction you create tools with which you can build a conversation again. So I think that is a challenging thing, and the more refined the fine-tuning is, the more complex the environment becomes. So I think fine-tuning is like really, that is the litmus test, because fine-tuning allows you to create a conversational experience in detail, right? So now you have maybe something that's on the one opposite. You've got Lex that's got very little fine-tuning, very little design or development affordances. And then you have something on the other side that's maybe Rasa or NVIDIA Riva that's got like so many knobs and levers you don't know. And you have like OpenAI. That it's, I mean, the way they manage the conversation, I can say, who won the 1994 Formula One Grand Prix in South Africa, and they will say Michael Schumacher. And I can say, how many children does he have? And they would say 2. Is he currently? So you can almost, like, the context is maintained so well, but then the problem is, how do you fine tune that? For an organization. So I think it's really what will fit the best in the organization, but then also what will scale well. And I think the key differentiator is fine tuning.
Yeah,
For
that makes
sure.
that makes sense. And when it comes to large language models, it gets harder, doesn't it? I remember reading something fairly recently. I put it in the LinkedIn newsletter from Emily Bender, and she was talking about hype and the hype in AI, and the New York Times or the New York Magazine written a piece on OpenAI, and it was like really kind of glorified and stuff like that. And she was literally just picking holes all the way through. It was absolutely fantastic. But one of the points that she made was, and I kind of referenced this when I wrote last week about Google's Lambda 2 large language model. And it was that the companies themselves, like Google, even they will find it so hard to properly fine tune such a large language model because with 178 billion parameters, how on earth do you know which parameter to change and what the impact that parameter is going to have? And so it becomes an absolute minefield. And so thinking about, like you alluded to it earlier on, which is the commercial application of these things. It's fine for Google Assistant, which is going to be having conversations about Michael Schumacher and Formula One. But for a business like Vodafone or whoever, your conversations are all about your content, all about your knowledge and your services. And so, whether a large language model like that is applicable to those enterprises or even needed, really, is, I think, still to be debated, really.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that some of the demos are astounding. So I'll give you an example, okay? Like, so we used Microsoft ASR, right?
Mm,
And so obviously there's a base model, you can call that a large language model, and then you can train like acoustic model on top of that. So, and
mm,
IBM also has this, and I'm quite sure there are others as well. So, with Microsoft, you can take 20,000 recordings. So we literally took 20,000 recordings that was 10 seconds long, and we transcribed. I mean, these two hands transcribed 8,000 of those. My wife said to me, "Don't you have people that can do this?" So anyway, and then we trained that into an acoustic model. So that acoustic model was representative of age, gender, ethnicity, all those good things that represents your customers. And then, so there's something called word error rate,
mhm,
how you calculate the accuracy of your ASR. And that's why I'm saying, some of these, smaller organizations, they're running away with this technology. And the larger companies, I don't know how they'll keep up. But anyway, so our word error rate went from more than 30 to 18, and it even went lower than 18, and we were quite happy with that.
mm,
And then what we realized is that whenever you're in a noisy environment, like background noise, on a train or a bus, the acoustic model kind of gets stuck.
mm,
And because most of our training examples started with I want to, I need to, whenever there was noise, the acoustic model got stuck trying to transcribe this audio into text, and it would just transcribe I want to, I want, I want, I want. So we had this collection, a very small collection of words, and then when we saw that, we said to the user, "It sounds like in a noisy environment. Can I give you a few seconds to move to a quiet spot, or do you want to call back later, or I can even you can schedule a call back, and I'll phone you back."
mm,
And it really resonated with users because it shows empathy, right? I
mm.
mean, what is, and then people went, "Wow, you've got like noise detection. How do you do it?" But we it was just this pattern we saw, and we
Yeah,
just
yeah,
went. So, so sometimes I think those things are perhaps unintended. There's no
yeah.
feature within Microsoft that's got noise detection,
Yeah,
you know, and as far as I know, and the rest. But it was just something that we saw and we just leveraged, and it became a thing, right? And something we're doing. But I definitely agree with you. There's this. I think there's lots of hype, and how one can harness it and leverage it, and also obviously cost. I
yeah,
mean, cost is a huge consideration. So I mean, if I look at some of these models and the cost associated, of using the solutions, it's just staggering.
yeah,
Um, and at this stage, it doesn't add up.
yeah.
Um,
I think that, I mean, it's becoming a bit cheaper. I mean, what you're talking about there in terms of like the ASR retraining is slightly different to what I was kind of getting at on the large language model side, which is the likes of GPT-3 and Google Lambda 2 and those kind of NLU NLG kind of systems and their application to private enterprises. But
mm,
definitely the price of you know customized ASR models, customized TTS voices. I think probably about 2 years ago, excuse me, or maybe it's 3 years ago, the BBC spent somewhere close to the millions getting a customized voice built from Microsoft. But whereas now, you look at Reed Speaker, or you look at, you mentioned Resemble earlier on. And even Microsoft themselves have actually released almost like a self-service thing. Also, Nvidia have got one as well, a self-service kind of custom TTS creation. So I think the price will come down over time, as it kind of starts to mature and stuff like that. It needs people within the business like yourself who realize that we need a custom acoustic model for this, or we need a customized voice for this, and this is the value it's going to bring. And then two, people who've got the nous to kind of get on with it and actually do it, which I think a lot of companies don't quite have. But thinking about, we're going to get through, I know we're a bit over, but if it's all right with you, I want to get through these last two comments.
We can carry on for a bit, no problem.
Cool. That's good. So one from Olivia Day, which I think that there was one you were alluding to earlier on. I can't really pull up the whole thing. I can flash it up so we can see Oliver, but we can't really see the whole thing. So I'll read it out and I'll say, Cobus, you talked about the 4 pillars. And the possibility of deprecation or depreciation of 3 of them: intense, dialogue, state management, and responses. But can you foresee a stage where we move beyond another core concept of chatbots turn taking? Some voice solutions allow barge in by the user, but could it work the other way around with the bot interrupting the user?
Yeah, I must say, I think that there are 2 parts of the question. So the first part about the 4 pillars. For me, traditional chatbots, text bots, it's intense entities, dialogue state management, and then your bot messaging or your message abstraction layer. And so there's been like ideas how to deprecate one or more of these, and it's interesting, companies converge on a good idea. So the most of the conversational AI solutions, they converge on how NLU is done with intents and entities. They converge on the messaging, but the one area where there's a bit of a traditionally a non-convergence is dialogue state development and management. So they are basically, the one is like the design canvas, the way Dialogflow CX is doing it, and Cognigy and Nuance Mix. Then you have the more like the state machine approach. It's almost like the way Lex is doing it and Watson Assistant. We've got a state machine and you drag your states. And then the third one is just pro code, native code, right? And then the fourth one is really the idea. I think and that's Rasa's got the monopoly on that with machine learning stories, and to have this story learning and adapting. So I think that's the one area where like companies diverge. And then there was this whole idea of like, should we deprecate the state machine and just have, the best is to have no intents. Like, let's just deprecate intents and deprecate the state machine, and we're going to have this flexible bot. And I was a proponent of that. And but then, when I started looking at what the Gartner leaders are doing, they're actually doing the opposite, right? So they're not looking at deprecating one or more of these pillars. They're actually looking at merging the pillars and fusing them. So I think going forward, that's going to be, I think one's going to see more of that. So definitely in the Gartner leaders, the visionaries and the ones that can execute, you see a merging, and they're building, they're not deprecating intents, they're actually fortifying intents, right? So they're actually adding more functionality and more definition to the intents. And you especially see that with Core AI and Cognigy, and I saw these days, I posted it, I think 2 years ago, I wrote this article on how you can have structure in intents with rasa. I actually forgot about it. They've been having it for long. So you're actually seeing that these things are merging, and so some of the leaders, they're actually combining grouping of intents with certain sections of the flow. So there are two things happening. So it's almost something you can call intentities. So entities and intents are really closely coupled, and certain entities only goes with certain intents, which makes sense. So that's more like a cohesive, the way the customer would speak. And then you see that certain parts of the flow is coupled to certain parts of the NLU. So you're seeing this closer coupling, and then I forgot some of it, but you're seeing things like nested entities. Microsoft has got machine learning entities that's nested. You're seeing nested intents quite a bit now as well. Sub-intents is becoming more common, follow-up intents. And then there was something that Core AI's got, I forgot the name, but they've got a trait, traits as well, which are introduced. So you're seeing more and more structure being built in. And I think that's probably going to be the way forward, where there's not a deprecation of one or more of these structures, but bringing them together. And then you have things like Watson Assistant actions and Microsoft Power virtual agents, where they've totally deprecated the NLU, but that's for a specific, narrow use case where you want to just have a small bit of automation, and it's obviously not something that will scale across the organization. I think the second part is the turn taking and the barging. That's something that's really hard over the telephone. We struggled with people speaking over the bot speaking over someone. You try and listen for cues, and then there's some background noise that interrupts the bot, and the bot waits for speech input. So the one area we really found worked well is opening the speech input and giving the user the opportunity to be more verbose. But I think it's almost at this stage it makes sense to regiment. I know one of the opcos introduced background music, to more, to when the bot speaks. I guess is to create a bigger contrast between the bot speaking and me speaking. So maybe it helps me to wait for the bot to complete and not barge in. And the second thing people are introducing, I think they call it ear cons, like different
little sound effects,
to signal the end of the bot's dialogue and the start of my dialogue. But I think that's one area that needs huge improvement, is that turn taking. If I can just mention one more thing on that, Kane, the reason why it's really, really tough is something called face speed, right? So I read the first time about face speed in the Fjord Design and Innovation. But I think they were subsequently acquired by Accenture. I'm not too sure. But Fjord Design and Innovation coined this term face speed. And they said that face speed is the fastest way we communicate. There's no communication between humans that's faster than face speed. And face speed is basically your facial expressions. You gaze, where are you looking? Lip detection, who's speaking? So if we're a group of friends speaking, you look at who's making eye contact. You look at who's speaking, and you look at that person. You look at facial expressions like surprise. Sometimes you speak and someone loses interest. You can see it, right? At the speed of light, literally, you see this guy lost interest. And so something they said was that, to get conversational, to get a voice bot right, somehow we've got to get to the point of face speed, where the bot can detect those facial cues, and then you can have things like barge in, or you can prompt the user, or you can see that the user lost interest, and you can ask the user. So, for instance, NVIDIA Riva has got this in one of their demos. It's in a car.
Yeah,
So
gaze detection, hasn't it? that what you're
Yes,
talking
yes,
about?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they use gaze detection, facial sentiment, emotional detection, lip activity. They identify the speaker, and those are all. And I think it's very rudimentary at this stage, and probably experimental. But that is the first foray into face speed, where you can manage. And I think if you within Video Reaver, you can really start, if you really leverage those features, you can really start, having this conversation where the bot can manage the turn taking because you're reading the face speed, you
Mm,
know. But
mm,
if you can't do that, then unfortunately it is definitely a challenge, and I don't know to what extent um, it can be solved, you know.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting. You've alluded to some things there that it's interesting because starting when we started doing this stuff, we were focusing really on voice assistants, Alexa and Google Assistant. And over the course of designing for that medium, you realize that really it's interactive audio. It's not it's not a voice conversation as such. And the more that you can use audio, the better it is. Earcons, music, that kind of stuff turns it into an experience rather than a kind of like rapid fire question answer kind of thing. And even Google Assistant does some pretty good stuff. If you ask it the football score and stuff like that, it will read you the results, but behind it, it will have the sound of a chanting crowd and stuff like that, which is really cool. But it's interesting how hearing you say that, it seems as though some of these practices, which they should be, are kind of arriving into this space, which has been traditionally more conversational as opposed to interactive audio. But fundamentally, that's what it is. It's audio out and audio in.
um,
And I think there's definitely things you can do with dialogue design to help the user understand when you've finished and when they should start and all that
mm,
kind of stuff. But the big problem I've found is that at the moment, unless you look at a company like Action AI with their own bespoke kind of speech recognition models, end of speech detection is a I think a bigger problem because it's all
um,
based on silence basically, and then it's based on detecting any noise from the user. So in order to cut it for barging, it's based on a threshold of noise detection. It's almost like a for those audiophiles out there, it's almost like a gate. So there's a threshold of sound input, and when it reaches a certain decibel level,
mm,
then it kicks in, and you can cut the bot off. And so with Dialogflow CX, if you're not careful, you can just have someone going like that, putting a drink down, the bot
mm,
hears a sound and thinks, "Ah, right, someone's talking. I'll shut up," and it'll just stop dead. And or then you'll be in the middle of talking and you'll need some thinking time and you'll pause for a little bit. It'll think you've finished because of the end of speech detection, and then it will carry on when you're midway through an utterance. And so it's these things that you need to kind of tweak, and with a bit of dialogue design and with sensible kind of crafting, it can kind of be a bit better. But something like Google, for example, silence detection is all you've got in order to detect that someone's finished speaking. It's not using the acoustics of what's being said,
mm.
which is a challenge.
Yeah, just on what you said, it makes sense to, we found that it helps the bot to manage the dialogue. So I'll give you a classic example. We saw funny things, right? So initially we didn't know this. So people were silent on,
Mm,
like, we had huge silence on the call.
mm.
So that's relatively easy. Then we had people just saying hello, and then the bot would say hello, and the person hello, and the bot they played this hello song, and people discovered it, and then for long periods of time, hello, they just the transcript is hello. So it became like a game. Maybe the users thought it was like what do you call it, the Easter egg or what?
Yeah, an Easter egg. Yeah, yeah.
So we changed that. We played a few rounds of hello ping pong, and then we said hello again. And hello. We can say hello all day, but I can try and help you with what your problem is. Try and describe your problem. So then we started getting traction. I think there was some sad people when we broke the hello ping pong game. Then we started to get some traction. Another thing that happened a lot was people was putting the call on hold. Now,
Ah,
there's a
interesting.
specific, specific female voice. It sounds like a female voice that says, "Your call has been placed on hold. Please wait," and that just repeats.
Right,
So the
interesting.
moment the call went on hold, we just disconnected. And then obviously noise, right? So it's not really directly directly related to dialogue turns, but there were ways to manage the dialogue based on those anomalies. But I agree with you. It would be the ideal if you could detect this is the end of a question or a sentence, and then respond.
Absolutely. Well, Cobus, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. Long time coming with those Vodacom shackles on, but thankfully we got there. I appreciate your time. It's been absolutely fantastic. Really, really insightful. Definitely, everyone who's been tuning in is obviously knows who you are. But for those listening on the podcast, definitely go to cobusgreyling.medium.com. COBUSGREYLING.medium.com to check out Cobus's writing. And what's next for you, Cobus? Then what's on the agenda?
I'm enjoying. I'm not being irresponsible, and I'm enjoying my freedom. So it's nice to have opportunities. So I think I'm enjoying the time just to be able to write and explore, and hopefully soon I'll head into the new direction.
Yeah, cool.
A firmer direction.
Cool.
Yeah.
That sounds good. I'm just going to put a link to the webinar I mentioned to everybody in the chat here, if I can find it, because you might be interested in signing up to that. It's the webinar around the irony of big tech, why your speech recognition is probably a load of tosh. And yeah, we'll be doing that on June 9th. Tomorrow, we mentioned Bodium actually earlier on in the conversation. We'll be chatting with the CEO of Bodium tomorrow. And yeah, next week, I haven't got my diary with me, but next week we've got more conversations coming. And so please do join us for that. I'll just quickly double check. We've got Alpharithmic and also Speakeasy AI. Speakeasy AI is a good company when it comes to speech recognition, NLU, and bespoke end of speech detection, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, yes, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Cobus, for joining us. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you for your participation, your comments, questions, and all that kind of stuff. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one.